They set me up on a blind date with an obese girl. But my reaction left the room in tears spinning hook. "You've got to be kidding me, Eric," Klement hissed, his voice tight, eyes scanning the crowded upscale restaurant. "This was your idea of a perfect match?" Eric shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Klement's piercing gaze. "Look, man, I told you she has a great personality. Just give it a chance." "A chance?" Klement's laugh was bitter, echoing slightly over the clinking glasses. He looked across the room at the booth where she sat alone. "You set me up for a joke. A cruel, public joke." He turned back, his expression hardening. "Well, the joke's on you, because I'm not playing." Chapter 1. The Setup. Klement O'Keefe, a man whose tailored suits usually matched his meticulously ordered life, adjusted his tie for the third time. He wasn't nervous, he was annoyed that he had let his friends Eric Tumova and Trond Henry talk him into this. "It's just dinner," Trond had said, clapping him on the shoulder earlier that evening. "You work too hard, Clem. You need some spontaneity." Spontaneity, Klement thought grimly, was overrated. He preferred spreadsheets, predictable outcomes, and women who fit neatly into his carefully constructed world. Women like Rosa Langier, his ex, who had left him for a startup CEO with a better golf handicap. He checked his Rolex, 7:15 p.m. His date was late, another strike against spontaneity. He scanned the room again. The dim amber lighting cast long shadows, making it difficult to make out faces at a distance. Then he saw her. Or rather, he saw the commotion she inadvertently caused. A woman was navigating the narrow space between tables. She was not the waifish, conventionally attractive type Klement usually found himself seated across from. She was decidedly large, her body taking up space in a way that seemed to make the surrounding patrons uncomfortable. She bumped a chair, apologizing profusely to a scowling man in a double-breasted jacket. She dropped her clutch. A waiter swooped in to retrieve it, his expression strained. Klement watched, a knot forming in his stomach. Eric and Trond's smirking faces flashed in his mind, the hushed whispers when they thought he wasn't listening. "Wait till he sees her," Trond had chuckled. "It's going to be epic." The woman reached a secluded corner booth, his booth, and sank into the velvet upholstery. She looked flustered, her cheeks flushed, a stray curl escaping her messy bun. Klement stood up slowly. The realization washed over him, cold and sharp. This wasn't a setup, it was a setup. A prank designed to humiliate him, to puncture his perceived arrogance. They wanted a reaction. They wanted him to storm out, to make a scene, to prove them right about his shallow expectations. He walked toward the booth, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Every step felt heavy, burdened by the sudden intense anger directed at his supposed friends. As he approached, the woman looked up. Her eyes, a striking clear blue, met his. They were wide, anxious, and incredibly vulnerable. She offered a small, hesitant smile that didn't quite reach those eyes. "Klement," she asked, her voice surprisingly soft, trembling slightly. "I'm Lize. I'm so sorry I'm late. The traffic was unbelievable." Klement stood frozen for a second. The anger still simmered, but looking at Lize Petchel, something else flickered, a sudden sharp pang of empathy. She was the punchline to a joke she didn't know she was part of. He forced a neutral expression, pulled out the chair opposite her, and sat down. "It's fine," he said, his voice clipped. "Traffic is always bad." He didn't miss the slight slump of her shoulders, the way she pulled her cardigan tighter around herself. The silence that stretched between them was heavy, suffocating. The prank was in motion, but Klement suddenly realized he didn't want to play the part assigned to him. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. The waiter approached, a practiced smile plastered on his face. "Good evening. Can I start you off with some drinks?" "I'll have a gin and tonic," Klement said sharply. Lize looked at the menu, her fingers nervously tracing the gold lettering. "Just water for now, please." "Still." The waiter nodded and retreated. The silence returned, thicker than before. "So," Lize started, her voice barely a whisper, "Eric told me you're in finance?" Klement looked at her. Really looked at her. Beyond the obvious physical difference from his usual dates, he noticed details. The nervous energy radiating from her. The way she avoided making direct eye contact for more than a second. The faint scent of lavender that clung to her. "Yes," he replied, keeping his answer short. Investment banking. That must be intense, she offered, trying to keep the conversation afloat. It is. The conversation felt like pulling teeth. Klement was acutely aware of the eyes on them. He saw Eric and Trond at the bar nursing their drinks, watching the booth with barely concealed amusement. It made his blood boil. He wanted to expose the charade. He wanted to tell Lize the truth, to show her how cruel these people were. But looking at her, he hesitated. How would she react? Would she crumble? Would she be angry at him for being part of it, even unknowingly? Their drinks arrived, providing a momentary distraction. Lize took a small sip of her water, her gaze fixed firmly on the white tablecloth. Look, Lize, Klement said, his voice lower, losing some of its sharp edge. I'm going to be honest with you. Her head snapped up, a flash of fear crossing her face. Honest? This, he gestured between them, was a mistake. A terrible, cruel mistake. Lize visibly flinched. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking paler than before. I don't understand. My friends, he practically spat the word, glancing toward the bar. They set this up as a joke. They wanted to see how I'd react. They wanted to embarrass me, and they used you to do it. The words hung in the air, heavy and devastating. Lize stared at him, her blue eyes wide, welling with unshed tears. For a moment she didn't speak. She just processed the absolute humiliation of the situation. Then, slowly, she nodded. A small, heartbreaking nod of acceptance. I see. Her voice was remarkably steady, though Klement could hear the tremor beneath it. Of course they did. She reached for her clutch, her movements slow and deliberate. I should have known. People like Eric don't just set up people like me with people like you. The quiet dignity in her response struck Klement harder than if she had screamed at him. There was no anger, only a profound, weary resignation. Lize, wait, Klement said, reaching a hand across the table, though he didn't touch her. I'm not leaving. She stopped, looking at him with utter confusion. What? I said I'm not leaving. He met her gaze firmly. They want a reaction. They want me to bolt, to prove I'm exactly the shallow jerk they think I am, and they want you to feel terrible. He took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. I won't give them the satisfaction. We are going to sit here, we are going to have dinner, and we are going to act like we are having the best time of our lives. Chapter 3. The Defiance. Lize looked at him as if he had spoken in tongues. You want to fake it, just to spite them? Yes, Klement said, a hint of a genuine smile playing on his lips for the first time that evening. It's the least we can do. Think of it as a performance. A very petty, very satisfying performance. Mia, Lize hesitated, her eyes darting toward the bar where Eric and Trond were now leaning in, clearly trying to gauge the situation. She looked back at Klement. The defensive wall she had thrown up seemed to lower slightly. Okay, she said slowly. A performance. I can do that. Good. Klement leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. So, Lize Petchel, tell me something about yourself that Eric didn't know. The shift in dynamic was immediate. It was no longer a date. It was an alliance. They were co-conspirators against the table by the bar. Lize took a deep breath, a genuine, albeit small, smile breaking through. Well, she began, her voice gaining strength, Eric thinks I work in data entry because I told him I handle files, but I actually run a small independent publishing house specializing in marginalized voices. Klement's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Really? That's actually fascinating? What kind of books? As she spoke about her work, Lize transformed. The nervous, flustered woman who had arrived late vanished, replaced by someone passionate, articulate, and fiercely intelligent. She talked about the struggle to get unheard stories into print, the joy of discovering a new voice, the complexities of the publishing industry. Klement found himself genuinely engrossed. He realized, with a start, that he wasn't faking his interest anymore. He asked questions, debated points, and found himself challenged by her sharp intellect. They ordered food, a lavish spread that Klement insisted on. If we're performing, we need props, he'd said. They laughed. Not polite, forced laughter, but real, belly-deep laughter. Lize had a wicked sense of humor, dry and observational, that caught Klement off guard. She told a story about a particularly eccentric author that had him wiping a tear from his eye. Throughout the meal, Klement subtly monitored the bar. Eric and Trond were no longer smirking. They looked confused, irritated, and increasingly uncomfortable. They kept gesturing toward the booth, clearly debating whether to intervene. "They're getting restless," Klement noted, taking a bite of his steak. Lize glanced over discreetly. "They thought you'd be gone by appetizers. I told you, I'm not giving them the satisfaction." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and surprisingly good food. When the dessert arrived, a decadent chocolate soufflé, Lize groaned. "I couldn't possibly," she said, leaning back. "Performance, remember?" Klement teased, sliding the plate toward her. They shared the dessert, the atmosphere between them shifting from conspiratorial to genuinely comfortable. Klement realized he was having a better time than he had on any date in recent memory. The pretense had vanished, leaving only a genuine connection that he hadn't anticipated. As the waiter cleared their plates and presented the check, Klement didn't even glance at it before handing over his card. He stood up, offering his hand to Lize. She took it, her hand warm and soft in his. They walked out of the restaurant together, leaving Eric and Trond staring after them, completely bewildered. The cool night air hit them as they stepped onto the sidewalk. The tension of the evening seemed to evaporate, leaving them in a surprisingly peaceful silence. "Thank you," Lize said softly, looking up at him, "for staying." "Thank you for the performance," Klement replied, meaning it more than he expected. "And for the excellent conversation." He didn't want the night to end. The anger that had consumed him earlier was gone, replaced by a strange new curiosity. The prank had failed spectacularly, but it had yielded an unexpected result. He looked at Lize, seeing past the superficial judgments he had initially made. He saw a strong, intelligent, and incredibly resilient woman. "Can I call you?" he asked, the words surprising even himself. Lize's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face. Then, a slow, genuine smile spread across her features. "I think I'd like that," she said. Chapter 4. The Severing and the Spark. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Clement O'Keefe's penthouse apartment, casting long geometric shadows across the pristine hardwood floors. Usually, this ordered, silent space brought him peace. Today, it felt cold, sterile. He stood in his kitchen, a cup of black coffee going cold in his hand, staring at the relentless buzzing of his phone on the marble island. The screen lit up with notification after notification. Eric. "Bro, you took that bit way too far. Hilarious, though." Trond. "Call us. You owe us for the entertainment last night. Did you actually pay for her dinner?" Klement felt a visceral twist of disgust in his gut, a sourness that had nothing to do with the coffee. He had spent years cultivating these friendships, bound by college fraternities, shared ambitions in the cutthroat financial sector, and a mutual, unspoken agreement to prioritize surface over substance. He saw it now with a clarity that was almost blinding. They weren't friends, they were an echo chamber of his own worst tendencies. He didn't text back. Instead, he dressed in his standard armor, a tailored navy suit, and headed to the private squash club where he knew Eric and Trond played every Saturday morning. The rhythmic thwack of the rubber ball echoed in the brightly lit court as Klement pushed through the glass door. Eric, sweating and red-faced, lowered his racket, a wide, oblivious grin spreading across his face. "The man of the hour," Eric crowed, wiping his brow with a towel. "Trond, look who finally decided to join the land of the living. We thought you might have eloped with... what was her name? Godzilla?" Trond snickered from the corner, taking a swig of water. Klement didn't smile. He walked slowly onto the polished wood floor, his leather shoes silent. He stopped 2 feet away from Eric, his expression entirely devoid of warmth. "Her name is Lize," Klement said, his voice deadly quiet, lacking any of the explosive anger from the night before. This was a cold, calculated fury. Eric's smile faltered slightly. "Whoa, take it easy, Clem. It was just a joke. You've got to admit the look on your face when she waddled over—" "I'm ending this," Klement interrupted, his tone cutting through the cavernous room like a scalpel. Trond stepped forward, frowning. "Ending what? The joke?" "Yeah, man, we get it. The bit is over." "No," Klement corrected, his eyes locking onto Trond, then sweeping back to Eric. "I'm ending this. Us, the dinners, the squash games, the networking events. I am done. You two are pathetic, hollow men who have to humiliate a kind, intelligent woman just to feel a fleeting sense of superiority. It's repulsive. Eric flushed, his jaw tightening defensively. Oh, come down from the cross, Klement. We need the wood. You're exactly like us. You dumped Rosa because she gained 5 pounds over the holidays 2 years ago. Don't act like you're suddenly St. Francis of Assisi. The words stung because they carried a grain of a historical truth. Klement had been shallow. He had been complicit in their toxic worldview. I was, Klement admitted, the admission tasting like ash in his mouth. But I'm not anymore. Do not contact me again. Ita, without waiting for a response, Klement turned and walked out of the court, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. As the heavy glass door swung shut, a massive weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. He pulled out his phone, bypassing the dozens of texts from his former friends, and tapped on a new contact. Lize Pechel. Across town, in a cramped but vibrant office smelling of fresh ink and strong chai, Lize was staring at a manuscript. Beside her, her colleague and closest friend Ida Anai was rapidly typing on a mechanical keyboard. So, he actually stayed? Ida asked, pausing her typing to peer over her tortoiseshell glasses. A finance bro? Voluntarily? He didn't just stay, Ida, Lize said softly, tracing the edge of her coffee mug. He fought back, in his own quiet, intense way. He made them look like absolute fools without even raising his voice. And he asked to call you? Ida pressed, a hopeful smile tugging at her lips. Lize, that's huge. It's probably just a courtesy, Lize deflected, her lifelong defense mechanisms kicking in. He felt bad. It was pity, Ida. A handsome, wealthy investment banker doesn't just suddenly decide he wants to date someone who looks like me. The world doesn't work that way. Just as the words left her mouth, her phone chimed. An incoming call from an unsaved number. Her heart did a frantic, erratic drum roll against her ribs. She picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly. Hello? Lize, it's Klement. O'Keefe. His voice was deeper over the phone, a rich baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. Hi, Klement, she breathed, ignoring Ida's frantic, silent gesturing from across the desk. I hope I'm not interrupting your work, he said, sounding unexpectedly nervous. I wanted to see if you would do me the honor of accompanying me to the botanical gardens this afternoon. No performances, no hidden audiences. Just you, me, and far too many orchids. Lize closed her eyes, a genuine, radiant smile breaking across her face. I would love that, Klement. Chapter 5. Worlds Colliding. The city botanical gardens were a lush, sprawling oasis of vibrant greens and explosive floral colors, completely insulated from the concrete jungle surrounding them. Lize wore a flowing emerald green sundress that cascaded beautifully around her curves, pairing it with a comfortable denim jacket. She felt nervous, hyper-aware of the space she occupied, but as Klement walked beside her, his presence acted as a grounding force. He was dressed down, at least for him. A tailored linen button-down and dark jeans, though the watch on his wrist still cost more than her car. Yet, there was no pretense in his eyes. He listened to her with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. So, your publishing house, Klement said as they strolled through the humid, fragrant air of the tropical greenhouse. Ida mentioned to me on the phone that you're about to sign Dorothy Harris. Isn't she the author who wrote that incredibly controversial essay on systemic poverty? Lize beamed, her eyes lighting up with passion. Yes, she's brilliant. The major houses wanted to tone her down, make her more palatable for mainstream audiences. But her raw, unfiltered voice is exactly what makes her powerful. We promised not to censor her. Klement stopped, turning to face her, his expression filled with genuine admiration. That takes courage, Lize. Sticking to your principles when there's an easier, more lucrative path. It's the only way I know how to operate, she replied softly. I've spent my whole life being told to shrink, to take up less space, to conform to what other people find acceptable. I won't do that to the stories I publish. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray curl behind her ear. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of warmth straight to her chest. Never shrink, he whispered. They wandered out of the greenhouse and toward the cobblestone paths near the water lily ponds. The atmosphere was incredibly romantic, the afternoon sun casting a golden glow over everything. Lize felt a dangerous, terrifying bloom of hope in her heart. Maybe this is real, she thought. Maybe I'm allowed to have this. Klement, "Oh my God, Klement, is that you?" The high-pitched, perfectly manicured voice shattered the peaceful atmosphere like a thrown brick. Klement visibly stiffened. Lize turned to see a woman approaching. She was stunning. Tall, impossibly slender, wearing designer clothes that looked fresh off a Milan runway. Beside her was a broad-shouldered man with slicked-back hair and a smug expression. It was Rosa Langier, Klement's ex-girlfriend, and her new fiancé, Bruno Dahlberg. "Rosa," Klement said, his voice instantly dropping 20 degrees. "Bruno." "Darling, it's been ages," Rosa cooed, stepping uncomfortably close to Klement and kissing the air near his cheeks. She pulled back, her eyes raking over Lize with a slow, calculating sweep that felt like a physical violation. Lize instantly felt large, clumsy, and utterly out of place. The emerald dress that had made her feel beautiful an hour ago suddenly felt like a cheap costume. "And who is this?" Rosa asked, a saccharine smile on her lips. "Are you volunteering for the Big Brothers Big Sisters program now, Clem? How charitable of you." Bruno let out a loud, braying laugh. The air rushed out of Lize's lungs. The cruelty was so casual, so effortless. She instinctively took a half-step back, wanting the earth to swallow her whole. This was the reality she had feared. This was Klement's world, and she was a trespasser in it. Before Lize could utter a word of retreat, Klement moved. He didn't step away from her. He stepped in front of her, slightly shielding her from Rosa's predatory gaze. He reached back and firmly grasped Lize's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "This is Lize," Klement said, his voice radiating a lethal, icy authority that Lize had never heard before. "The woman I am incredibly fortunate to be seeing." Rosa's smile froze, turning brittle. "Oh, I see." "No, I don't think you do, Rosa," Klement continued, his gaze pinning her down. "Lize possesses more grace, intelligence, and genuine beauty in her little finger than you could hope to achieve in a lifetime of starving yourself for validation. Do not ever speak to her or about her in that tone again." Bruno stepped forward, his chest puffed out. "Hey man, watch how you talk to my fiancé." "Or what, Bruno?" Klement snapped, turning his glacial stare on the man. "You'll challenge me to a round of golf? Take your superficial superiority complex and walk away, now." The sheer force of Klement's conviction left the other couple speechless. Rosa's face flushed a deep, ugly red. Without another word, she grabbed Bruno's arm and dragged him down the path, her designer heels clicking angrily against the stone. Silence descended on the gardens again. Klement exhaled a long, shaky breath and turned back to Lize. His eyes were wide, searching hers frantically for damage. "Lize, I'm so sorry. Don't," Lize interrupted, her voice trembling. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, but they weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of shock. No man had ever stood up for her like that. No man had ever claimed her so fiercely, so publicly. She squeezed his hand, a lifeline in a storm. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Klement said fiercely, pulling her gently into his chest, wrapping his arms around her trembling shoulders. "I will always do that." Chapter 6. The Poisoned Well. It was Wednesday, 4 days after the magical afternoon at the Botanical Gardens. Lize and Klement had texted constantly, building a quiet, profound intimacy over shared jokes, book recommendations, and late-night confessions. Lize was practically floating through the aisles of her publishing house, a soft hum on her lips as she organized a stack of fresh manuscripts. Ida watched her from the corner, smiling over her coffee mug. "I don't think I've seen you this happy since we finally got the printing press to work without jamming," Ida teased. He's different, Ida," Lize confessed, pausing her sorting. "He listens. And when he looks at me, I don't feel like a punchline. I feel beautiful." "You are beautiful," Ida affirmed fiercely. Lize's desk phone rang, breaking the moment. She answered cheerfully. "Independent Voices Publishing, Lize speaking." Well, if it isn't the charity case." Lize's blood ran cold. The voice was male, slick, and coated in malice. Eric Tumova. "How did you get this number?" Lize demanded, her heart instantly shifting into overdrive. "Google is a wonderful thing, sweetheart," Eric drawled. "Look, I'm calling because, honestly, I feel a little bad for you. You seem like a nice enough girl, even if you don't belong in our circle. And Klement is taking this whole Saint Klement routine a bit too far." "I don't want to speak to you," Lize said, her fingers tightening around the receiver until her knuckles turned white. She moved to hang up. "He's using you to punish us," Eric said quickly, the words tumbling out like poison. He was humiliated that we pranked him, so now he's proving a point. He told Trond yesterday that he's going to string you along for a month, parade you around to show us how enlightened he is, and then dump you. "You're lying," Lize whispered, but a cold, dark seed of doubt, planted years ago by a society that constantly rejected her, began to sprout in her chest. "Am I?" Eric chuckled darkly. "Check your email. I just sent the generic company address a little audio clip from the squash club locker room last month. Just thought you should know who you're really dealing with before you get your heart broken." The line went dead. Trembling uncontrollably, Lize turned to her computer monitor. She opened the general inbox. There was an email from an anonymous address with an audio attachment. "Lize, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," Ida asked, rushing over. Lize couldn't speak. She clicked play. The audio was scratchy, echoing off locker room tiles, but the voices were unmistakable. Eric, Trond, and Klement. Eric's voice. "Come on, Clem, she wasn't that bad, just a little extra padding." Clement's voice, sighing heavily. "I have standards, Eric. I don't do extra padding. I want a woman who takes care of herself. Letting yourself go like that is just a sign of laziness and a lack of discipline. It's pathetic." The recording stopped. The silence in the office was deafening. The words hit Lize with the physical force of a freight train. Laziness, lack of discipline, pathetic. Those were the exact words she had heard hissed behind her back her entire life, and they were coming from Clement's mouth. It didn't matter that the recording might be old. It didn't matter that it was out of context. The underlying truth, that Klement harbored those beliefs deeply enough to voice them to his friends, shattered the fragile illusion she had been building. Eric was right. She was just a prop in Clement's revenge fantasy, a way to prove a point. "Lize." Ida reached out, her face pale with sympathetic horror. "I have to go," Lize choked out, grabbing her coat and her bag. The air in the office suddenly felt too thin to breathe. She ran out of the building, the gray, overcast sky outside, matching the sudden devastation in her soul. She walked aimlessly for an hour until it started to rain, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked into her hair and clothes. She found herself at a bus stop, shivering, tears streaming silently down her face, mingling with the rain. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb, splashing water onto the pavement. The back door flew open, and Klement stepped out holding an umbrella. He looked frantic, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. "Lize! My God, I've been calling you," he said, rushing toward her, holding the umbrella over her head. "Ida called me. She said you ran out. She said—" Lize took a sharp step back, stepping out from under the umbrella and back into the cold rain. The look of utter betrayal and heartbreak on her face stopped Klement dead in his tracks. "Don't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't touch me." Klement dropped his arm, the umbrella tilting uselessly. "Lize, what happened? Please, talk to me." "I heard the recording, Klement," she said, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a deep, agonizing pain. "The one from the locker room. About your standards. About how people like me are just lazy and pathetic." Clement's face drained of all color. "Lize, that was years ago. That was before what? Before you decided I was a convenient tool to get back at your friends?" she cried, the tears flowing freely now. "Eric told me everything. You're just stringing me along to prove how enlightened you are, to prove you're better than them." "No," Klement stepped forward, his eyes desperate, pleading. "That is a lie, Lize. Eric is a vindictive snake trying to ruin this because I cut him off. That audio, that was the old me, the man I was before I met you. You changed me." "You don't change core beliefs in a week, Klement," Lize said, shaking her head, wrapping her arms around herself to ward off the chill that was coming from the inside out. "You pitied me at the restaurant, and now you're using me as a project. I am not your good deed for the year. I am not a lesson for you to learn. Lize, please, you have to believe me. I love—" "Stop!" she screamed, the word tearing from her throat. "Just stop. Go back to your world, Klement. Go back to your tailored suits and your perfect, disciplined women. Leave me alone." A bus pulled up behind her, its doors hissing open. Without looking back, Lize stepped onto the bus, the doors snapping shut behind her. Klement stood alone on the pavement, the umbrella falling from his limp grip to the wet concrete. He watched the bus pull away, taking the best thing that had ever happened to him into the gray, unforgiving rain. He had never felt so utterly, completely hollow. Chapter 7. The Echoes of the Past. The days that followed the confrontation in the rain bled into a gray, indistinguishable blur for Lize. The vibrant energy that usually pulsed through the cramped offices of Independent Voices Publishing had been entirely sucked out, replaced by a suffocating heaviness. Lize threw herself into her work with a frantic, desperate intensity, trying to drown out the echo of Klement's voice on that awful recording. Laziness, lack of discipline, pathetic. The words played on a continuous loop in her mind, a cruel soundtrack to her waking hours. She edited manuscripts until her vision blurred, organized marketing campaigns until her fingers cramped, and avoided Ida's sympathetic, hovering gaze at all costs. "Lize, you need to eat something," Ida said gently on a dreary Tuesday afternoon, setting a paper bag from their favorite deli on Lize's cluttered desk. "You've been running on black tea and sheer willpower for a week. Dorothy Harris's book launch is in 3 days. If you collapse before then, Dorothy will write a scathing essay about your terrible self-care habits." Lize managed a weak, brittle smile, not looking up from the galley proofs in front of her. "I'm fine, Ida, just focused. This launch has to be perfect. The major houses are waiting for us to fail. We can't give them the satisfaction." "We won't," Ida assured her, pulling up a chair. "But you can't outrun a broken heart by working yourself into the ground. It wasn't your fault, Lize. Eric is a monster, and Klement is a victim of his own past." "He's not a victim," Lize snapped, the sudden flash of anger surprising them both. She dropped her red pen, rubbing her weary eyes. He was a willing participant in that world. He believed those things. Maybe he still does, deep down. "You don't just erase decades of conditioning because you had a nice dinner and walked through a garden. I was stupid to think I could be the exception to his rule." Across the city, in an entirely different world of glass and steel, Klement O'Keefe was experiencing his own personal hell. His penthouse, once a sanctuary of minimalist perfection, now felt like a mausoleum. He hadn't slept properly in days. The image of Lize stepping onto that bus, her face twisted in a mask of ultimate betrayal, haunted his every waking second. He had tried calling. He had drafted 100 emails and deleted every single one. Words were utterly useless now. He had spent his entire adult life wielding words as weapons and tools of manipulation in boardrooms, and now, when he desperately needed them to convey the profound, earth-shattering truth of his heart, they failed him completely. He was sitting at his mahogany desk in his corner office, staring blankly at a complex merger portfolio, when his assistant buzzed through. "Mr. O'Keefe, Alfredo Gaines is on line 1. He's pushing for an update on the Alberti acquisition." Klement blinked, shaking himself from his stupor. Alfredo Gaines was a notoriously ruthless corporate liquidator, and Aaron Alberti was his shark-like acquisitions manager. They represented a massive media conglomerate that specialized in buying up small independent platforms, stripping them of their assets, and shutting them down to eliminate competition. "Put him through," Klement said, his voice raspy from disuse. "Klement, my man." Alfredo's slick, overly familiar voice boomed through the speakerphone. "Tell me we have the green light. Aaron is chomping at the bit. We've got the target in our sights and they are heavily leveraged. It's a prime hostile takeover scenario." Klement frowned, pulling up the digital file he had barely glanced at earlier in the week. "Refresh my memory on the target, Alfredo. You sent over a dozen micro-acquisitions." "Oh, it's a tiny little nuisance operation," Alfredo chuckled dismissively. "Independent Voices Publishing. They just snagged a contract with some radical essayist, Dorothy Harris. The big boys upstairs don't want her making noise, so they want to buy the house, bury the book in legal red tape, and dissolve the company. Easy money." The world seemed to stop spinning. The air in Klement's office suddenly turned freezing cold. Independent Voices Publishing, Lize's life's work, her sanctuary. "Are you sure about this, Alfredo?" Klement asked, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register that his former friends would have recognized instantly. It was the tone of a predator locking onto its prey. "Absolutely," Aaron Alberti's sharp voice chimed in, having been listening on the other line. "They have a massive balloon payment due on their printing press lease by the end of the month. They don't have the capital. We swoop in, buy the debt, call the loan, and force a liquidation. We'll own them by Friday. Just need you to sign off on the banking transfers." Klement's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of his desk. He saw it all clearly now. He couldn't fix the past with apologies. He couldn't unsay the terrible things he had said in that locker room, but he could do this. He could protect her. He could use the very power and ruthlessness she despised to build an impenetrable fortress around her dreams. "Send me the full financial breakdown immediately," Klement commanded, his mind moving at 1,000 miles an hour. "Don't make a single move until I give the final authorization. I am taking direct control of this file." He hung up the phone before they could respond. He didn't care about the ethical boundaries of his firm. He didn't care about his bonus or his reputation in the financial sector. Klement O'Keefe was going to war. Chapter 8. The Silent Guardian. Thursday morning brought a torrential downpour to the city, perfectly matching the gloomy atmosphere inside Independent Voices Publishing. The day had started terribly. Their primary paper supplier had suddenly demanded cash up front, citing market instability. Then, the bank had called, leaving a chillingly vague voicemail about a review of their credit facility. Lize was sitting on the floor of the stockroom, surrounded by boxes of Dorothy Harris's newly printed book, trying to stave off a full-blown panic attack. Tomorrow was the launch party, the culmination of a year of blood, sweat, and literal tears. And suddenly, it felt like the floor was collapsing beneath them. The front doorbell chimed, a harsh, jangling sound that set her nerves on edge. She heard Ida's voice, tight and defensive, from the front reception area. "I'm sorry, you can't just barge in here. Do you have an appointment?" Lize scrambled to her feet, dusting off her jeans, and hurried out of the stockroom. Standing in the middle of their cozy, chaotic office were two people who looked like they had stepped out of a predatory corporate nightmare. A man in a pristine charcoal suit with slicked back hair, and a woman in a razor-sharp blazer carrying a thick leather briefcase. "Lize Pexel?" the man asked, flashing a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Alfredo Gaines, this is my associate, Aaron Alberti. We represent Omnicorp Media." A cold knot formed in Liz's stomach. Omnicorp was the massive conglomerate that Dorothy had explicitly criticized in her upcoming book. "What can I do for you?" Lize asked, stepping protectively in front of Ida. Aaron Alberti didn't smile. She slapped a thick folder onto Lize's desk. "You can sign these papers, Ms. Petchel. We have, as of this morning, acquired the primary debt on your printing press lease and your outstanding operational loans from your local bank. You are currently in violation of the debt-to-equity covenants." "What?" Lize gasped, the blood draining from her face. "That's impossible. We make our payments on time every month." "Technically true, but functionally irrelevant," Alfredo chimed in, stepping forward to inspect a framed book cover on the wall, looking at it with absolute disdain. "The terms of your loan allowed the bank to sell the debt. We bought it, and we are calling the loan. You have exactly 24 hours to produce $200,000 in liquid capital, or we seize the assets, including the intellectual property, which means Dorothy Harris's little manifesto goes straight into a shredder." "You can't do this!" Ida shouted, her face flushed with outrage. "This is a targeted attack. It's illegal." "It's business," Aaron corrected coolly. "However, we are willing to offer a generous buyout. Sign the company over to Omnicorp today. We will forgive the debt, and we'll even write you both a nice little severance check. You walk away clean. But the publishing house closes." Lize felt the room spinning. $200,000. She didn't even have $2,000 in her personal savings. This was it. The end. They had waited until the very last moment, right before the launch, to strike, ensuring maximum devastation. She looked at the folder, the pristine white paper mocking her. She thought about Dorothy, about the countless marginalized authors who relied on this tiny, cramped office to have their voices heard. She thought about giving up. "I won't sign it," Lize whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. Alfredo sighed, adjusting his expensive cufflinks. "Ms. Petchel, please don't play the martyr. You don't have a choice. We'll be back tomorrow morning with the marshals to lock the doors. It's over." They turned and walked out, leaving a suffocating silence in their wake. Lize sank into her desk chair, burying her face in her hands. The tears she had been holding back for days finally broke loose, racking her body with violent, uncontrollable sobs. Ida wrapped her arms around her, crying silently alongside her. What they didn't know was that across town, Klement had been awake for 48 straight hours. His desk was littered with empty coffee cups and complex financial flowcharts. He had bypassed Alfredo and Aaron entirely, going straight over their heads to the board of Omnicorp Media. He had leveraged every ounce of his reputation, called in favors he had been saving for a decade, and executed a maneuver so aggressive and financially punitive to Omnicorp's other holdings that it bordered on corporate warfare. At 4 p.m., his phone rang. It was the CEO of Omnicorp. "O'Keefe, you're a madman," the voice on the other end growled. "You're disrupting 3 of our major acquisitions just to protect this tiny, worthless publishing house?" "Why?" "Because it is not worthless to me," Klement said, his voice cold, steady, and terrifyingly resolute. "Here are my terms. You drop the hostile takeover, you sell the debt portfolio back to a private trust I've established, at a loss, and you never, ever look in the direction of Independent Voices Publishing again. If you agree, I release the hold on your tech acquisitions. If you refuse, I will personally see to it that your stock plummets by Tuesday." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. "Fine," the CEO spat. "The debt is yours. But you're making an enemy today, Klement." "Get in line," Klement replied, and hung up. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. He had done it. She was safe. Her company was safe. But he knew he couldn't tell her. If he swooped in as the wealthy savior, it would only confirm her worst fears, that he viewed her as a charity case, a project to be solved with money. She had to believe she won. She had to keep her power. Chapter 9. The truth brought to light. The atmosphere at the community center for the Dorothy Harris book launch was electric. Despite the looming threat of the marshals, Lize had refused to cancel. If this was to be their last night, they were going to go out fighting. The room was packed with readers, local journalists, and authors. Dorothy Harris, a fierce, commanding woman with striking silver hair, was at the podium, delivering a blistering reading of her essay that had the audience hanging on her every word. Lize stood at the back of the room, leaning against the wall, her heart a tangled mess of pride and impending doom. She kept checking the clock. The marshals could arrive at any minute. "A beautiful crowd, isn't it?" a slick voice whispered right in her ear. Lize flinched, spinning around. Eric Tomova stood there, wearing a smug, triumphant grin. He looked completely out of place in the bohemian crowd, dressed in a designer suit that screamed, "Finance, bro." "What are you doing here, Eric?" Lize demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and absolute disgust. "Get out." "I just came to watch the finale," Eric purred, taking a sip from a silver flask. "I heard a little rumor through the grapevine. Omnicorp, right? Nasty business. I guess playing in the big leagues has its consequences. See, this is what happens when people like you try to punch above your weight class." He stepped closer, his breath reeking of expensive scotch. "I told you Klement was just playing with you. The moment things got real, he vanished. You're losing everything, Lize. And you deserve it for thinking you could belong in our world." "She doesn't want to belong in your world, Eric, because your world is a pathetic, hollow wasteland." The voice cut through the hum of the crowd like a thunderclap. Lize gasped. Klement was striding through the double doors at the back of the hall. He looked entirely different. The polished, untouchable armor of his perfectly tailored suits was gone. He wore a simple black sweater and jeans, looking exhausted, slightly disheveled, but his eyes burned with an intensity that pinned Eric to the spot. "Klement," Eric sneered, recovering his bravado, "come to watch the charity case fold? I hear the marshals are on their way." "There are no marshals," Klement said, stopping a few feet away. He didn't even look at Lize yet. His entire focus was on dismantling the man in front of him. Omnicorp dropped the acquisition. The debt was purchased by an anonymous philanthropic trust, endowed entirely to support independent, marginalized publishers. Independent Voices is fully funded, debt-free, and legally protected from any corporate interference in perpetuity. Eric's jaw dropped. The color drained from his face as the reality of Klement's words sank in. You bought them out? You spent millions on this garbage? I protected something beautiful from parasites like you, Klement said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. I told you once to never contact me again. If you ever come near Lize or this publishing house, I will ruin you, not physically, financially. I will strip you of every asset, every account, and every ounce of privilege you use to hurt people. Get out. Now." The sheer, terrifying promise in Klement's eyes broke Eric. Without a word, the man turned and practically ran out the doors, shrinking into the night. The reading at the front of the room had stopped. The crowd was staring. But Klement only had eyes for Lize. He stepped toward her, stopping a respectful distance away, terrified she would tell him to leave. Lize was staring at him, her chest heaving, tears pooling in her eyes. "You did that," she whispered. "The anonymous trust. It was you." "I didn't buy your company, Lize," Klement said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I set up a blind trust. I have no ownership, no board seats, no control. It belongs entirely to you and Ida. I had to secure the perimeter, so you could keep doing what you do." Lize shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "But the recording." "Eric, the recording was real," Klement said, his voice breaking. "He didn't try to hide it, didn't try to make excuses. He stood before her, utterly vulnerable, laying his worst sins bare. I said those things. I was a cruel, arrogant, shallow man who judged the worth of a human being by impossible, toxic standards. I'm so deeply ashamed of the man I was." He took a slow, agonizing breath. "But you broke me, Lize. You broke that man entirely. You showed me what actual grace, intelligence, and beauty look like. I can never take back the words I said in the past, but I will spend every single day of my future proving to you that I am not that man anymore. I love you, Lize, not as a project, not as a lesson, as the most incredible woman I have ever met." Silence blanketed the back of the room. Lize stared into his eyes, looking for the pity, looking for the superiority she had feared her whole life. She found nothing but raw, desperate, agonizing love. She took a step forward, the distance between them evaporating. "You really ruined 3 major corporate acquisitions for me?" she asked, a wet, watery laugh escaping her lips. Klement let out a breathless, relieved laugh, his hands hovering tentatively near her waist. "I would burn down Wall Street if it kept you safe." Lize reached up, tangling her fingers into his hair, and pulled him down. When their lips met, the entire room erupted. Dorothy Harris let out a triumphant cheer from the podium. Ida burst into fresh, joyous tears, and a wave of applause washed over them. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a joke. It was the beginning of a real, unshakable truth. Conclusion. Klement and Lize's story proves that while the past cannot be erased, it can be outgrown. Love, when it is genuine and fierce, has the power to shatter our most toxic beliefs and rebuild us into better versions of ourselves. What began as a cruel joke designed to humiliate ended up severing Klement from a hollow life and leading him to his true equal. Lize didn't just save her publishing house, she saved him. If this emotional journey of redemption, defiance, and true love moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that real beauty is never skin deep. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell for more gripping emotional audio stories every single week. We'll see you in the next one.